he knew Joseph Beuys very well. He was the one who invited him to take part in this legendary, again, exhibition, Zeitgeist, in Germany in 1982. He was the one who kind of instigated a Stag Monument. Everybody, especially here in England, knows this sculpture very well. It is like for many, many years in the permanent collection of the Tate, and it's the first time we're showing the original work now in these exhibitions. And
if you allow me to interrupt once again,
no,
I like to interrupt.
No,
I do want to from one point. I do want you
Indeed.
to remember my friend Christos, your comedian who died this year, who was my co-curator. Okay, he died this year.
Stage is yours in one
Partially.
But of course, it's absolutely right what you're saying regarding this exhibition in Berlin in 1982. We asked Norman to be part of this original concept for this exhibition. We worked for a long time together, get the loans and get the concept for the show. We wanted on one side to do an encyclopedia of Beuys by seeing, the works from different periods in our Berkeley gallery, and then showing very early work, which thanks to the estate of Joseph Beuys, his family in Düsseldorf, we got works which we could also show to the public the first time, works from 1948 and 1949, also from the early 50s, like this sculpture which you see in the exhibition. It has never been shown before. And so Norman was like a column in this project, and I really thank him for all the effort he's put into it. The book which we are publishing is not ready today, but it will be out very shortly, and I hope you will all get a copy. Thank you for also participating on this panel. Antony Gormley, as Norman said, is an academician of the Royal Academy. We don't need to introduce you, one of the great artists of our time, one of the great sculptors here based in London. We are very lucky to have our own long history with Antony Gormley by working with him on exhibitions in Paris, in Austria. For many years, we were able to kind of accompany, throughout almost 30 years of this extraordinary artist, and be able to kind of work on exhibitions. And I have to say, when we opened this exhibition a couple of weeks ago, we had a dinner with the family and with many, museum directors from the museums in England, in London, and there were many speeches, but one speech kept kind of being always remembered. It was actually the speech of Antony, because he spoke as an artist, he spoke as a colleague of Beuys, he spoke as an admirer, and when we kind of produced a video about this exhibition, we asked Antony back, and he was very generous to come again to talk about this towering figure of the 20th century of contemporary art. For him as a young artist, and please look at this video, which is extraordinary. And again, thank you, Antony, for saying yes to this invitation to speak today. And Louisa, thank you. Louisa who is a great journalist here in London, who knows the art world since many, many years, who really is part of the DNA of London, and to be kind of
naughty girl of London.
No longer.
So I think I don't want to be interrupted one more time by Martin Rosenthal. That's the reason stage is yours.
My job now to be brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very much, Thaddaeus. And what a treat and a pleasure it is to be here and to be amongst this wonderful, extraordinary exhibition, the most significant show of Joseph Beuys since I can remember in London for a very, very long time. And also with the audience, many people with exceptional knowledge of Beuys, both on and off the podium. And I'd very much like Caroline and various other people perhaps to talk later on when I throw it open to the general questions, because it is a really exceptional gathering, both of artworks and of people. And I think I want to start, I will be talking very much about the exhibition and about your ideas behind it and about the original Stag Monuments and the Zeitgeist show. But Norman and Antony, I'd like to start off, first of all, as you actually knew Joseph Beuys, I'd like to start with some personal reminiscence of Joseph Beuys. Very interestingly, one of the catalogue essays that I read you'd written, Norman, you said, the sound of his laughter was infectious to all his company. the sound of his laughter. And when I think of Joseph Beuys, I don't think of a laughing person, the laughter ringing in my ears. So, I'd like to have a little thought from you about how it was when you first met him and what he meant to you.
Before I say anything else, I'm really thrilled that Caroline is still here, who is perhaps was the great mediator of Joseph Beuys into the Anglo-Saxon world. In this country and in America, she curated the still definitive exhibition at the Guggenheim in whatever year that was, I think in 80 something or other. 79, which I remember incredibly well. And she was a great friend of Joseph Beuys also at the time when his English became really excellent. But when he began to, as it were, step outside Germany, I feel that his English was not that perfect. And Caroline, who speaks perfect German, perfect Italian, perfect French, and so on, who was at that time the art critic of The Guardian, and she played an absolutely fundamental role in actually literally telling this very funny thing, because in those days the world was divided. We didn't talk about the art world. Now the art world is everything. The art world is it's obviously the whole of China and Asia and India and Australia and
Let's get to Joseph Beuys.
In those days the art world was very small, and there was a huge divide between Europe and particularly Germany and the Anglo-Saxon world, which at that time felt it knew everything. And London was a little outpost of New York, and that was the way it was, Caroline. I'm sure you will agree. It was a very small world, and it was a kind of secret world. I mean, it was a little bit like even my friend Raymond, who's a wonderful composer over there. The contemporary music was serious.
So Norman, when did Joseph Beuys come into your world?
Well, Joseph Beuys came into my world when, in 1974, by complete chance, my life, my own biography has been a series of weird and wonderful accidents. And by chance, I somehow found myself, because I spoke German, at the ICA. This is at the time when there was something called Brexit or something, when Great Britain entered the European community in 1973, or I think it was in 73. The ICA was given a certain amount of money, I think £10,000, to stage festivals of European culture. And the first one was a French festival. And then they were desperately looking about for somebody who spoke German. There are lots of people who speak French, but not that many people who seem to speak German. And for some weird reason, I was stumbled upon and asked to, as it were, organize a big exhibition of German culture. And then I did this rather wonderful kind of tour around Germany. And I started off in Hamburg, and then I went to Berlin, and I went to Munich, and then I ended up in kind of the Dusseldorf, Cologne world. And at that time, I found this catalogue, which was called.
Are we getting
Art in the Political Struggle, which was an exhibition that had taken place in Hanover, which was curated by this friend who was to become a really close friend of mine, a guy called, very difficult, complicated person called Christos Ioannidis, a Greek guy who'd studied in Germany with great philosophers and so on in Heidelberg, etc. And he was kind of long hair, quite a big guy, a strange, wonderful person. But we got on incredibly famously, and he introduced me to two worlds, which have basically changed my own life in terms of art. He introduced me to the world of Joseph Beuys and the world of George Barsnitz. And I went around Germany, I saw lots of different things, but I decided those two worlds for the ICA were the right worlds, but I had to choose one. The ICA is quite small. So in the end, I chose to go with Joseph Beuys and his colleagues. Somehow we did this exhibition.
So when did you meet him? Tell me about your first impression.
My first meeting was, I think I met him briefly in Dusseldorf, and then we met properly in 1974. You can see photographs that come up from time to time of myself, Christos, and Joseph. We met in Berlin, at a strange symposium, because of course I'm talking about the world of 1960, post 1968 and so on and so forth, which of course Beuys had a lot to do with. We're now 50 years after those the famous, we need it again. Actually, to young people, I say, we need 1968 again. I think that's one of the things that could save this world. All the horrible troubles of this world is a new student revolution and young people rising up again. And at that time they were, and this was slightly in that atmosphere. In 1974, I was trying to do an exhibition that reflected the spirit in Germany of, the world of 1968.
And this was the art and
I met Joseph Beuys came together with Caroline, came to Berlin as well, and we had this symposium about how to structure the exhibition. I remember we wanted 7 artists, and there was an artist called Wolf Fell, some of you may know of him, and he decided to pull out. And then Joseph Beuys said, I know another German artist we should include in this exhibition. And that artist was somebody, again, who became an incredibly close friend of mine, and that was Gustav Metzger, who was, of course, an artist living in England, but somehow very much a German artist.
And the ICA show was a continuous performance, wasn't it? A lot with Joseph Beuys.
Basically, Joseph Beuys said, I just want 3 blackboards. And so I said, all right, I'll do 3 blackboards. And so 5 months go by, and I have to organize the exhibition in the way one does. And I went to I said, where do I get blackboards? He wanted not just old-fashioned, new blackboards, I needed blackboards with easels, and it's quite difficult to find these things. You can't just go out and buy them. So I ran out what was, I think, called the LCC in those days, the kind of equivalent of GLC, and I found some school depot, and I suddenly saw 100 blackboards, or maybe more. So I got a van, I took 100 blackboards to the ICA, I put the 100 blackboards instead of 3 blackboards that were required into the little office next to it. You go into the ICA, some of you know the ICA, there's a kind of little office that you go down the steps into the gallery below, it's still there. And so these 100 blackboards, so Joseph Beuys, we had Hans Harker was in the exhibition, rather wonderful artist called Albrecht Day, Carpe Bremer, who was a very interesting artist who's beginning to be recognized again in a curious kind of way. I mean, that was also rather wonderful. And he did these wonderful sort of paintings about capitalism and, the problems of capitalism. Are we sitting in a capitalist? And Joseph Beuys, in a way, he wanted to engage in permanent dialogue. He said, I will come every day. But having 100 blackboards, he had the 3 easels, and he basically, when he finished, and people would come in, sometimes there were 3 people in the room, or 2 people in the room, sometimes there were 100 people in the room, and sometimes we had evening performances, and the atmosphere was a bit like in here. And so he would take, this is in 1974, I'm not talking about Zeitgeist, and so he would pick up the blackboards and he would throw them down and make a huge din. It was kind of one of his great performances. Caroline will remember it very, very well as well. And it was an incredibly, and basically, having said he wanted these 3 little blackboards, the whole floor of the ICA was covered with these blackboards. And then at the end of the exhibition, I do remember very well, he came with his dealer, or his kind of assistant dealer, because René Bloch wasn't really a dealer, he was a kind of mediator as well, and had looked after Joseph, some of his interests in Germany. They started wrapping up the blackboards. Joseph would always, of course, during the, he would restore the blackboards every day. He was asking first, we had fixative, and then when fixative came too much, he said, go up to Boots up in Piccadilly and buy some hairspray. So I would buy, lots and lots of, 20 canisters of hairspray, and he would spray these things, And the whole thing is beautifully documented in a book with wonderful photographs, which was edited later by, because in fact, this environment then was later to go to Venice, to the Venice Biennale, in a slightly transformed way, and then in a retransformed way. It went to New York, to René Bloch's gallery. He had a very beautiful gallery where he was later to do, Beuys was later to do the Coyote performance. I think, was that way around, wasn't it? It doesn't matter. And then later the whole thing was bought by the National Gallery of Art in Berlin, where you can see these black buildings today in the Hamburger Bahnhof. Of course, every time I go there, I get a little kind of slight tinge of pleasure, I can't deny.
I'm pressing pause on your tinge. I'm pressing pause now on your tinge of pleasure, and we're going to talk about Zeitgeist in a minute. But I just want to talk to Antony first about your first impressions of Beuys, your first meeting, and what impression you made.
I just want to really get to the extraordinary thing that Norman has just described. I mean, I think we're in danger of moving from, as it were, object nature to lose the main point. What is Beuys's message? That the space of art is transformative. I mean, it's really wonderful to feel in this room now the same kind of gathering that when I saw him at the ICA talking, I don't know whether it was that performance or a later one, but the kind of energy that this man could generate, and that feeling that actually through the space of art somehow things could change. And Norman is quite right. He had taken the spirit of Paris in '68, but somehow transformed it into something much deeper and much more cultural. And when he says, you know, creativity is capital, I think he had this absolutely profound belief that in all of the conflicts, I mean, I think his own life was one in which art was a transformative process personally, from the trauma of war and near death. And he wanted to universalize that particularity of his own experience, in a sense mythologize it as well, but then offer it back to the world as a potential. And I just think that actually it's beautiful to have Caroline and Norman here linking us back to those moments. He said once that, you know, teaching is my greatest work of art. He had, and to get back to your question, the generosity of the man in terms of his insistence that actually everyone was an artist. There was, as it were, creative potential in all people, that what was necessary.
And in all things.
And hidden in material. And that material itself was transformative. I mean, you know, an exhibition such as the one we have here, which is an extraordinary exhibition, is at the same time relics of, in a way, this faith in the transformative power of the space of art. And I just, you know, I met him at a show called Retrospecteur at the Doring Street Gallery I mean, this was the first personal meeting of Antony Dauphin. And he was immediately so interested in a way that, you know, normally private views can be quite painful, particularly if you're the artist, you know, and you've got to meet all these people that you've never met before and somehow explain what you're trying to do. And it wasn't like that with this man. He was immediately listening. He immediately was interested. He immediately, in some way, totally, 100%
engage with every human being.
Yeah. And I just thought, you know, here is a man who's, you could say, human
charisma.
Yeah, this extraordinary presence, but at the same time, you know, humble and interested in everything and everyone, and that was actually, I mean, you know, in these sort of circumstances of a kind of, you know, West End, very posh gallery, to somehow make that contact and feel the interest and sympathy of an artist who I already admired enormously was just wonderful. And I can remember I'd made my first lead body cases and I acted them out for him in the middle of this rather crowded opening of his work on the floor. He wasn't bothered about that at all, yeah, had some suggestions anyway. And he was interested in the lead. He was interested in everything to do in a way with the idea that the body could be a space of transformation. And anyway, I was.
Was this an artist that spoke to you as a young artist? I mean, had you followed him assiduously? Did you know his work? Was he influential in?
Well, at Caroline's show at the Guggenheim, that book, was it called Stations?
Well, it's called Stations.
Yeah.
Still,
I mean,
they say, so without complimenting Caroline, it's still the book I refer to the most often on Beuys, I personally do, and I still, it has not been bettered as a volume in English or in German on Joseph Beuys. It is without question the definitive work.
But anyway, that was for me.
I really mean that.
For me, as a student, I was just finishing the slave then. Fantastic.
But the other thing about Joseph was his sense of something that doesn't exist very much, but existed very much. There was something very much of the 19th century of Joseph in the sense that he seemed to have something that doesn't barely, which is something called universal knowledge. He was really not only interested, but he seemed to know about everything. He knew about literature. He knew about science in many, many different. So I mean, he was a little bit like a kind of early 19th century figure in so many ways, and of course, his art does relate in a way that some people object to. I'm going to say so, to kind of German universal knowledge as it was practiced very much in the early 19th century, and he was a kind of. In the way like John Cage. I knew John Cage too, and he too felt like a 19th century American figure. A person, both these figures seem to, great artists carry the culture of the world behind them. And Joseph Beuys was certainly one of those artists. He really, you felt he goes back a very long way. And in the little essay that I've written for this catalogue, for example, I went to see the Scythian exhibition in his museum. It's one of the great exhibitions taking place in London.
And they were the people who rescued him, the Koreans.
I was just so amazed that you felt that Joseph Beuys too seemed to come out of ancient art, comes from a long, long time ago, as well as being a very modern man. So to be a great person, you need, this sense of culture that, that makes you a much more complete person. The memory, because art is about memory, and somehow Joseph seemed to contain within him an incredible memory of so many different things, and that made him an unbelievably beautiful person. And that, obviously he had a very charismatic look, and he was a performer, and if he wanted to be, he could be a clown, you know what I mean? We talked about his,
I like what you said about laughter.
Yeah. His laughter was incredibly infectious. But he was a deeply serious man as well. And he had it in him, and that was the thing that gave me, and when I got to know him a little bit better, and the more I investigated his art, the more I felt, because, I'm interested, I'm somebody who somehow, I'm an old-fashioned boy, really. I'm supposed to be, though, I'm interested in new art, but actually I personally am always interested in the way that the new, the old is transformed into the new, and that the great old is always new, and the new is always old.
Tell me about how Stag Monuments came about in Zeitgeist.
Sorry?
Tell me about how Stag Monuments, because obviously some...
Well, I did this rather weird exhibition, which had, then I went to the ICA, to the Royal Academy, as some of you may know. This was, 5 years later. It's a bit of an adventure, you know what I mean? I left the ICA, and then I had 2 years sort of almost doing nothing, and I couldn't find a job. I kept applying for jobs all over the world, everywhere in this country, but chapter ops, and I kept being turned down. But then amazingly, I got, by some weird fluke, this job at the Royal Academy. Okay. So I went to the Royal Academy, and then when I got to the Royal Academy, I'd done this rather extraordinary thing. I'd been asked to do some rescue operation at one of the castle documenters. And at that time I met the director of the Castle Picture Gallery. he became quite friendly with me, and I said, I was going to the Royal Academy. I said, why don't we bring the great picture collection of the Royal Academy of the Castle Gallery to the Royal Academy? Incredible Rubenses, they have 20 Rembrandts and 50 Rubenses and blah, 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 blah. One of the great... No, I'm just coming to it. Okay. Don't worry. And then just suddenly, just about 8 months before the exhibition was due to open at the Royal Academy, the German restorers, there's a kind of union of German restorers that said this exhibition does not take place, and I had to do something very, very quick. So the exhibition collapsed, and if you run an institution, you have to fill it, Thaddaeus, who runs this gallery, he has this exhibition, you've got to do the next show. And if you're at the Royal Academy, which is an exhibition centre, when an exhibition is over, you have to have another exhibition. So I suddenly saw, and then I went to see the president of the Royal Academy. He said, go to New York, go to Leo Castelli, and go and bring American art to London. And I suddenly saw the great, and I remember running up the stairs, calling my friend Christos, and I said, this is the chance to bring, as it were, Baselitz and Co. to London. And that's what eventually I did, to huge approbation. People hated it, but then that show took place in London, and then Christos, who suddenly this amazing building became available in built Martin-Gropius Bau. So we did what you might, having done this show, A New Spirit of Painting in London, about a year and a half later, we did what you might call the Baroque version of A New Spirit of Painting. At that time, painting was, thought to be the new thing, the palette, the Italian painters, and Julian Schnabel, blah, 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 and so on, Kiefer. They were all young artists, relatively young. Baselitz wasn't so young, but he was thought to be young. In the general opinion of the world, he was thought to be a newish artist. So you had lots of anyway, but we had this huge place in the middle of the Martin-Gropius Bau, this huge atrium. And so we had to fill it. You can't fill a huge atrium with paint. So we called Joseph. Joseph came to Berlin and said, I don't really want to do this. And after several hours staying, and this time it's still that Germany was divided, with the Berlin Wall, etc., was there, etc., etc. And then he suddenly said, I will do it if I can bring the entire I wanted to bring the entire contents of my studio to Berlin. We'll just, this matter of bring them to Berlin. So that's in the end what he did, but at the same time, because, one of the great things about Joseph was his transformational, his ability to transform. And so he transformed his studio into the extraordinary environment, which I like to think, maybe I'm wrong, I like to think is still the definitive image of the Martin-Gropius Bau, nearly 40 years later. And I mean, if you think of the Martin-Gropius Bau, I don't think the environment with the great mountain, which then I compare in my little catalogue essay now to, these great Scythian mountains that existed all over Eurasia. Eurasia being one of the great themes of Joseph, in this kind of, this idea of migration. And so we have these things. He took the tools, which you can do, the tools of his studio, and he covered them all. He did this clay mountain, and with some of the clay, he wrapped the tools in clay, which he described as Lemminge, which are lemmings, but lemmings.
We have them back here.
We have them here. They're all here. The lemmings, you see, is a kind of pun. And of course, Joseph, like all great, he had an amazing sense of language. So lemming is also very close to the German word for clay, which is lehm. The German word for clay is lehm. So they're Lemminge and Lemminge. So they're lemmings. These kind of little animals, scuttling over the edge, and at the same time they are playthings. And I mean, all these things you can see.
And they're quite psychological as well.
Anthony, would you like to say I'm talking too much? Come on. as you
well, I think what's so fantastic is you have, the original. Tape, we have the cast, metal cast of this, but here we've got the real things.
And he transformed the objects of his studio into these very wonderful images. Now, you can say things. You can say about Michelangelo's last site if you want. It's a lot of big. I often say that. If you have to want to go there. Art, you have to want to go to it. If you go to it, it's incredibly. If you want to look at Michelangelo's great wall. It's a lot of naked men falling down a wall. If you want to look at it like that, it's completely stupid. If you want to look at it like that, art is about wanting to go there. It's also about the audience.
And Antony, you talk very interestingly in the film about this incompleteness, the bringing of the studio, not to produce objects that are finished and monumental, but actually immersing the audience and the viewer in the studio, in the process, that seems to be so much part of the kind of the living quality.
Yeah, I think that some of his conceptual propositions about sculpture, the idea that warmth and coldness are qualities that can be implicitly engaged in sculpture. So, you know, that extraordinary work like the fat chair that is in Martin-Gropius Bau, or maybe it's in Darmstadt. I'm just trying to think where it is. Is it in Darmstadt in the Matilda? And then obviously this extraordinary project that he made for Munster, where he filled with mutton fat an entire underclass, saying that this was in some senses a negative space. We've all had those experiences, haven't we, of walking through piss-ridden, dirty underclasses that somehow talk about the shadow side of urban life. And he felt that this was something that could be redeemed, and recreated the underpass and then filled it solidly with the same fat that, in a way, connected to his own idea about regeneration. This mythological story of him being saved by the Tatars in the Crimea. And that work is now in Mönchengladbach and is strapped together with these vast sort of, because it is transforming, it is in the process of changing. And each lump has a thermometer stuck into it. And the way that he used a thermometer as a way of, as it were, catalyzing our sense of our own mortality, and then connecting it to a material state. And I think this idea of the transformative is what, well, maybe you and Caroline can talk more about the performative. I think that in the end, having made his journey, inspired originally by Lembrook, which is, I think, a really important point in the life, that he could have become a natural scientist, he could have become an architect. He chose to become an artist because of seeing this extraordinary sculpture called The Fallen, which is actually on show now here at Tate Britain in the First World War exhibition. And he said something really extraordinary, which is, I realized the job that sculpture could do. And then went to the Dusseldorf Academy as a young man, studied under an artist that he ended up not feeling very close to, changing to Maturet Studio, and in a way making these very intense small works, which we are blessed to have in this exhibition, because you really see, don't you, in that room, the beginning of a sensibility. These works from the late 40s and early 50s, where he's trying out plaster and wax, and in a way the mutability of form. Very, very intense, small things. But
like Rodin, who was another big influence on him.
Yeah, you should all go and see the Rodin show at the British Museum. That's another extraordinary thing. But anyway, I mean, the thing that interests me is that I think there was an impatience here. You know, he thinks of thought. Thought is form making. Thought is about making form, and somehow thought is quick and sculpture is slow. And I think there was a moment in his life in the maybe late 60s, early 70s, where he really felt that he had to somehow activate and perform the transformations that he intuited within materials.
One of the great lines of Joseph is this idea, I mean, what he used to say art is visual thinking. And I think that is true of all the visual art. I mean, every great artist. And art is about the originality of thought, then transformed into something substantial, whether it is ephemerally substantial or permanently, semi-permanent, because nothing is permanent, of course, nothing is forever. You know, even bronze is not forever, Antony.
I don't use, I refuse bronze. It's very
But it's more or less forever.
Yeah,
But I mean, you know, it's about the quality of the thought. What I love about Antony's work. Can I just say, if I'm allowed to say this, what I love about Antony's work is the way he somehow has found, it seems like an infinite number of ways to define the human body. You know, like
that doesn't mean to say that I'm not interested in thought and feeling. And
no.
To get that,
the body, it comes out of body. You know, the thought comes out of a human body. And that is, I think, I mean, I don't know, I'm not, you know, maybe you disagree, but that's where I find your work very Beuysien.
yes, I think it is. And I want to think of the body as, a place of transformation. And I think that, I mean, I want to just think about a particular performance, which is explaining art to a dead hare, which I think is a very, very useful particular performance that in a sense encapsulates this man who starts as a sculptor and becomes in a way a priest and a teacher and a healer. And I think the way that he used the gallery then, I don't know whether that was René Bloch, the gallery again, or it was Schmäler gallery. But the fact that you had to see him, as it were, through the front window of this gallery, he was there cradling a dead hare. And speaking in hare language. And I think what's going on there is actually this with a golden face. I wanted to read what he said about that performance in a minute, but what I think there's a bigger issue here, which is really to do with him wanting the participation of each and every one of us as viewers. That there was no final explanation. That actually art, in order for it to retain power, has to be mysterious and never fully explained. That actually one of its principal, in a way, duties in its role as a potential healer is to, you could say, bridge the gap between science, art, religion, and ritual, I think, or the idea of work. That's a question for Beuys. You know, can work be creative, or is it always in a capitalist system termed instrumental as a kind of form of capital exploitation? And I think I just wanted to read what he had to say about that. Joseph explains the performance thus: in putting honey on my head, I'm clearly doing something that has to do with thinking. Human ability is not to produce honey, but to think, to produce ideas. In this way, the death-like character of thinking becomes lifelike again, for honey is undoubtedly a living substance. Human thinking can be lively too, but it can also be intellectualized to a deadly degree and remain dead and express its deadliness in, say, the political or the pedagogical fields. Gold and honey indicate a transformation of the head, and therefore, naturally and logically, the brain and our understanding of thought, consciousness, and all other levels necessary to explain pictures to a hare, the warm stool insulated with felt, and the iron sole with the magnet on his left foot. He had an iron sort of slipper. I had to walk on this sole, and when I carried the hare around from picture to picture, so along with the strange limp came the clank of iron on the hard stone floor. That was all that broke the silence, since my explanations were mute. This seems to have been the action that most captured people's imaginations. On one level, this must be because everyone consciously or unconsciously recognizes the problem of explaining things, particularly where art and creative work are concerned, or anything that involves a certain mystery or question. The idea of explaining to an animal conveys a sense of the secrecy of the world and of existence that appeals to the imagination. Then, as I said, even a dead animal preserves more powers of intuition than some human beings with their stubborn rationality. Anyway, so it goes on. I mean, the insistence, I think, within his internal world that he wants to share with us, of, in a way, the need to challenge. I think in post-war Germany in particular, I mean, I think we all know that from visiting museums, and it doesn't matter whether you go to Hamburg or to Cologne, to Ludwig, the way that pop art and American minimalism became so dominant as, in a way, the ethos for the new, and in a way, the hopeful result of a painful Second World War. And Beuys says, no, absolutely not. We have to, first of all, accept that Europe is part of Eurasia. We have to think of Germany as it has always been historically, as a bridging ground between East and West and North and South. We have to think about, in a way, our deep mythologies, and look at these shamanic animals, the stag and the hare. I mean, it's amazing. I'm about to go and do a film for the BBC about the dawn of art. And there's a feeling in Beuys's work of a identification with these transformative forms of life. The stag that loses his antlers every year for them to regrow. And the bee as a social animal that produces honey as opposed to thought. I mean, this idea of relinking human creativity with wider systems and relinking art with, in a way, its origins, its relationship with place. The way that feeling is articulated through forms that have existed through millennia.
Which Beuys was incredibly good.
Was it your decision, Norman?
As also, if I may say so, in my head anyway, of course, as Baselitz too, was very good at transforming what I call the greatness of German art, which had, been taken for granted until 1933, but suddenly had been read by one of the most horrific kind of nightmares in human history, or at least seemingly in human history. At least so it seemed and was. You want to know it was the case, But somehow these two artists, in my opinion, I think would be a fascinating exhibition to do. As I sit here on this platform, I would like to do an exhibition about Beuys and Baselitz, because I think they were, one is a painter, the other is a kind of sculptor. Both have this sense of the Gesamtkunstwerk, and they have this incredible sense of the validity of German philosophy, poetry, and philosophy and poetry, especially, in which Germany, as it were, so excelled in the 19th century, and music too. The whole idea of the Gesamtkunstwerk was, and Beuys was able, what you see up there is a kind, the thing that he did in Berlin for us, incredible privilege to be part of, and I may say so, Thaddaeus. We have a very funny story about Thaddaeus. I can't resist repeating it, because Thaddaeus was Beuys's assistant on this project, somehow. I mean, he was a very young man. He'd gone and knocked on Joseph Beuys's door, and when I met Thaddaeus for the first time, I don't remember, but he remembers, he was making tea for Beuys. And he was Joseph Beuys's tea maker at the Zeitgeist exhibition. And I think somehow I'm so wonderful that he is here too, because he too has a very deep long-term relationship that goes back a long way. And I always want to get down off the platform and ask Karen if she wants to say something from here. Would you do it?
We've got a roving mic. We have a mic.
What? Caroline, would you like it?
We have a microphone. We have a microphone.
Let's have a mic.
Caroline, come and sit here for a moment. And I'll
No,
come
we
back
have a
again.
microphone. Norman, sit. We can get a microphone. Sit down. You disconnected your mic. No, it really would be wonderful to have some words from you, Caroline, please. While Norman's reconnected.
It's nice to have Caroline back because we
Give her
did a gig together, didn't we?
We did.
About Joseph, your dear friend.
We did a great gig.
A little while ago.
We should do it again.
You are.
I just wanted to say, is that right? Can you hear? Yes. I just wanted to say a few things on your theme, which is a wonderful theme, the transformational, about the exhibition that Norman was talking about, which was originally to consist of 3 blackboards and became 100. And it really shows, in terms of sculpture, how Beuys thought about transforming something perfectly simple, a load of blackboards. At the ICA over a month, he had
Into a landscape.
well, more.
See, like a sea.
Wherever you like.
Like Caspar David Fried's sea. Sorry. Come on, carry on.
During that month in London in the 70s, Beuys was exposed to all sorts of very strange people. You know, London in the 70s.
Like who? Any examples you can think of? Any strange people?
And every day people would come in, and I don't know what you're all like now, because I'm not in the art world anymore, but I don't know what your egos are like, how big they are.
Still pretty
But I
big.
tell you, in the early 70s, they were big.
I don't think they've shrunk much over the years.
So people would come in, you know, art students, lecturers, artists, everybody, with big attitude, and Beuys would be, you know, demonstrating the evolution of Western society through the Renaissance and on into the future, the sun state in Campanella and everything. And they'd go, yeah. But they say, I have an idea. So he would very cleverly, during that month, say, come and show me your idea. And then people would draw their stuff on these blackboards. And those blackboards became a line in time through what our English, British, European art world was like at that moment. The concerns, the egos, one stage, right? Mm-hmm. So as you say, they were wrapped up at the end of the month. His drawings with people's contributions, they all wanted to sign them, which was a strange thing. He rarely signed blackboards. Everybody wanted to be
He did a bit of rubbing out as well.
noticed. You know.
He did in secret rub some things out.
Well, I'm not going to judge Norman for that. Things were wrapped up, and the next venue was New York. And it was an exhibition for René Bloch, who is another young outsider. Beuys liked outsiders. He always exhibited with outsiders. He didn't have well-known galleries ever until the 80s. So he was with René Bloch in Soho, and Soho was then an absolute dump. I mean, the potholes were just, you had to wear Wellingtons to get around Soho in those days. And so this wonderful space,
First floor.
yes, up above, looking out over New York. And again, all the people came, and a lot of people came expecting to join in. You know, no chalk was provided, but you felt people were going to bring their own chalk. But no, transformational sculpture. Beuys had pushed it back one stage. This was a work that, where the public was concerned, was finished. He had laid it out very carefully over the floor. There was a compass line east-west, which, you know, is his old Eurasian, crossing Eurasia, crossing America, right across the globe, east-west line. There was a representation of the hair But the hair was a photograph of the moon. He was in a moon box. That was and it was a static installation. And people, because of all the hair fixative that Norman bought in Regent Street or wherever, people were actually allowed to walk over it, which for many people was quite shocking. I think it was. Some people walked around, but a lot of people marched over. So again, people were expressing the way they do, this sort of strange ego when presented with a work of art, and you know that well from your figures. It plays against people's egos, and it brings it out. That was the second transformation. So it wasn't a live work, but you could communicate with it, you could be in it. The third venue was the Venice Biennale. And at the Venice Biennale, it was installed in a long hall behind arched windows with glass in them. So he'd actually removed it from the public. The public were able to see the product, the artwork, to contemplate the artwork. And that was the third transformation. So you see how work goes from joining in with people, from being at people's disposition to being removed from them. We're talking about museums now, aren't we? And then it ended up in the museum in Berlin. It is the artwork, it's a monument.
Which is where it is there, where it is now.
Where it is.
You can see it today or tomorrow.
And that's its final transformation. This is a work which has gone from being something you could join in, where you could have an input or an opinion. This is museum stuff. And that was all in that work. It's 4 stages of transformation. And that's just one of the methods he used to use to articulate such things. You mentioned another, the great tons and tons of tallow, the fat, from the underground underpass, which was a negative space. He filled it with tallow, transformed it into a positive space. Think of the economic value, think of what it cost to make. Think of the unknown science that went into transforming an unknown, a negative into a positive. Nobody had ever melted or solidified that great amount of fat known to human beings, ever. All that needed scientists and everything. It was fantastic.
And in a kind of unknown, unpleasant, hidden away space too.
That's right.
Exactly.
An unknown space, unknown quantity of heat, an unknown solidifying process. And then for the museums, a very dangerous...
A long nightmare, yes.
A long nightmare, which he did again and again. The transformation, there was a famous piece in Paris when the Beaubourg opened. And the Beaubourg had gone to Los Angeles to get the best heating experts in the world to do their central heating. They hadn't gone to Paris or Düsseldorf or even London. They'd had to go to LA, and the heating stuck as de Gaulle or whoever was going round at the opening. And Beuys had put in a thing called plastische Fuß, elastische Fuß, which was felt stuffed with fat at the bottom. And as the as the French president looked at this work of art with a sort of slight curl of the lip, the fat started to roll towards his feet.
I have a Mrs. Thatcher story in Beuys. Shall I tell you that?
Yeah.
Which is quite a funny one. Just to introduce a bit of hilarity into this thing, is that when I did this big show at the Royal Academy called German Art in the 20th Century, which is one of Beuys's very last appearance, I mean, certainly his last appearance in London, he took over the central hall of the Royal Academy, had many great pieces there, including the famous tram stop piece and so on and so forth. And I remember the patron of the exhibition, that's another long story, I'm not going to bore with it, was Helmut Kohl, then the Chancellor of Germany. And Helmut Kohl came to London to see the exhibition and brought Mrs. Thatcher. And Helmut Kohl looked at the piece and said, "Negi, Negi," he said. "Joseph Beuys, famous German artist." Mrs. Thatcher looked very, very mysterious, very mystified as she looked at these pieces, because, as we know, our leaders are not even as cultivated as German ones, who learn German. They're not really plugged in. But I'm plugged in for Joseph Beuys. It's rather wonderful. Anyway, it's a little moment of hilarity.
I'm wondering, Caroline, whether you can fill us in a bit on the Free International University and Beuys's whole engagement with young people and teaching.
Well, Beuys used to call drawing, thinking. It was the thinking form. Drawing was the thinking form. Speaking was a thinking form, and speech for him was a material. You form air, puff out air. You use God knows what ancient means to transform that into a word. He was so intrigued by all these things we take for granted.
But he's always saying, think with your knees, isn't he?
Yeah,
I mean, he has that.
behind your knees.
Yeah, sorry. Behind your knees. But that idea that he had that the total sensorium of the body was an instrument of infinite capability that we somehow ignore 95% of. And I guess for him, that thing of speaking that was about using air and making an architecture of sound, which also had meaning, but it was all, you can tell from what he was saying about clanking about with that Mars material on his left foot, that he wanted us to be aware of every condition in the engagement with his work. So, what he did for Norman in the Gropius Bau, it wasn't just that mountain, it was the smell of the mountain. It was the way in which it challenged the architecture that contained it. And in some senses also, by being a mountain inside a building rather than being seen from a building, invited us to reconsider our position in relation between the elemental and the built. And I think that this, anyway, we've got away from the Free International University. The extraordinary thing is that the implication of his absolute faith that we had to open up our total capabilities. He had an immense set, he was a humanist who had an immense hopefulness for, in a way, human evolution, and that we were going to achieve this approach of the sun state.
Through knowledge, we would become better people, and that's why I don't know, Caroline, maybe you'd like to say more about that.
But anyway, he was working.
Who invented even the word Free International University? Was that his idea?
Well, I was going to make a very neat leap from the word to the Free University, but I've lost the chain. But his main driving force was not to have art in a ghetto. He resented that it used to happen on a single page in a newspaper. He wanted it everywhere. And just as he felt everyone was an artist, so he felt politics was far too important to be left to politicians. And he felt that, indeed, to be one of the most irresponsible consequences of the extreme division, which had happened through the academies and everything. The division of labour, leave that to the politicians, leave life to them. So he started very early on with, the first thing was the organisation students thing of
what was it called? Free democratic something.
For students and all the members are animals. Anyway, that started, but that soon evolved into the Organisation for Direct Democracy, which was also a popular plea for referenda instead of just giving your vote once every 4 years and that was the end of it. He felt referendums, rather influenced by the Swiss canton example, was a better thing. So he had an organisation called the Organisation for Direct Democracy in Düsseldorf, and that evolved into the Free International University for Creativity and Interdisciplinary Research, which is quite a mouthful.
But also interesting because now your disciplines are being more and more demarked.
That's right.
It's
That's
Such a
right.
step back from all that now.
He founded it with Heinrich Beuys, who, apart from being from Cologne, where Beuys was from Düsseldorf, which means you're talking cheese.
The great German authors of the immediate post-war period.
Heinrich Beuys, Nobel Prize winner, had beautifully in his novels tracked the dilemmas and evolution of German society from the time of the Nazis right through. His books are an extraordinary picture of those years. And Beuys used to find them rather difficult to read. He used to struggle to get beyond the first chapter. He said, because I know Henry, I know what he's going to say, you know. But together, they decided that they would have to do a bit more. So they founded the Free University. And it was a protest against the numerous clauses, restricted entry to higher education in Germany, and in particular restricted entry to Beuys's sculpture classes in the academy in Düsseldorf, which he opened out.
There were no, as it were, requirements for entry. You didn't have to take an exam. You didn't have to present work. The entry to Düsseldorf, to his studio in the Düsseldorf Academy, was entirely open and free.
Because everyone is an artist. So he took that to its logical thing.
And then he got sacked.
The ministry were horrified. And I don't know how many of you speak German, but the minister said, Herr Beuys wird fristlos entlassen, which is a very bourgeois saying if you're sacked, you know, with immediate application. And so it went on, and the Free University became his way of spreading this message of creativity generally.
But it was part of his bigger idea.
What a
really,
shame it didn't continue. I mean, what a shame that it couldn't be continued. What did it die with him?
What happened?
The idea of the Free
There's
University.
still one working in Oxford, the unit of social sculpture in Oxford. Oxford Brookes, there's still there.
Oh, that's a glimmer, a pilot light of hope there.
Because out of the Free University came, we did,
Yeah.
no, the Green Party did not come out of the Free University. The Green Party is its own evolution. Beuys joined the Green Party in Germany with very mixed results, really, because he'd always objected to political parties and traditional structures, and well, it was a difficult.
I mean, it is ifs and buts, and possibly rather a banal thing to say, but one just does wonder what he would make of the current status quo, you know, the way the world has changed, because, you know, certainly some of us of a certain generation and beyond hope things are moving in a certain direction, and now there seems to have been, you know, quite a few very scary U-turns into a more retrogressive way of looking. And I just wonder what you think. Obviously, it's a sort of balmy question to ask, really, but what he would have made of the way the world is turning.
He did often say that these attempts to influence the rest of life through art were his most important works. But of course, they can't be sold, they can't be owned. They are thoughts, and so they are victims of time and erosion and lack of illustration.
But it's still thrilling to go to Munster and see the tree, you know, to go to Castle and see the trees, and Castle growing.
One of his greatest work was the 7,000 Acres in Castle. And that's a transformational work par excellence in your...
Yeah, I think that's right.
It's still really exciting to see them there.
Take a stone, you've got one here, a basalt stone, which cracked into its hexagon shape at the very moment the earth cooled. So you have a moment in time. Still disputed, you know, creation or evolution on that bomb. And you plant a young oak tree next to it. And the young oak tree grows and grows and grows, 200, 400, 800,000 years, maybe, if it's lucky. And then what will happen? You go down, and the stone will still be there, as it was. And this work, you never had to describe it to people. They knew instantly. tree, stone, forever, come and gone. And that was
And there they are in
powerful
Castle.
thing.
It's still very powerful to see
Do you
them.
want to say something about that? Because I was thinking, knowing we were going to meet tonight, I was thinking about your men and time coming and going and tides.
Yeah, no, the industrial biological equivalent. Actually, you can keep that because I've got this one. Of that idea of, in a way, geological time, and the way that sculpture has always sought out stone as a material that could, in a way, carry human thought and feeling through time in a way that mortal bodies can't. But it's an extraordinary work, that castle work, that in a way asks such big questions about, in a way, a human effort in relation to, you could say, the sidereal, the planetary, the geological, the glacial. The fact that, hominins have been around for such a short time, our whole species evolution has been around for such a short time in comparison to the life of the planet, or certainly in comparison to the 3.7 billion years of the biosphere's development. And somehow, just by bringing these two things that he didn't make, but he had the idea, he produces this, in a way, interference within our built city environment, where we're asked to think about the relationship between present time and our context, and these different times, geological time and botanic time. But I think that
Human time.
and in which human time, we are an intercessory force.
I'm afraid I'm going to be intercessory force in a minute with human time, because I'm going to.
One last thing before we do that.
I'm stopping it. I want to open it up to the floor.
I mean, great artists can always be looked at from so many different perspectives. And in the end, for me, Beuys is the poet, the unacknowledged legislator. But that's only one way of describing him. But he is the most fantastic. For me, he's one of the most fantastically beautiful artists and art people, persons that I've ever come across and I've ever been privileged to come across. And I think one can still feel that beauty in these amazing relics that he's left behind. These drawings, these sculptures, say sculpture, yeah, they are sculptures, but they are more than sculptures. And
Well, I was
too.
particularly excited speaking. I was going to say, I think I was very excited to see the very early works here, and I think many people here would like to ask. They've got this amazing threesome on the podium. They're not going to be for very long, so anybody like to ask some questions for the last 2 minutes? Richard, here in front.
Yes. Since I've got all three of you captive, could one of you
Richard,
perhaps...
by the way, Richard co-curating, another kind of great friend of Joseph. I'm sure you worked with him.
I did indeed. Could one of you say a little bit more about his wartime experiences? I mean, as I understand it, he joined up as a very young man in 1940 as a volunteer. He wasn't conscripted, he was a Freiwilliger, having been in the Hitler Youth. He was stationed in Poland and later in the Crimea. It's sometime during this period that he decides he wants to become a sculptor, I think. I mean, as far as I know, he makes no artworks before the war. He doesn't go to art school before the war.
No, actually, can I just interrupt? He does say, first exhibition, some of his biographies, self-construct, first exhibition, A3 in...
Well, yes, but okay, you know what I mean. You know what I mean.
I know what you mean, it's all in the head.
What changed? Did he witness atrocities in Poland and the Crimea, SS, Wehrmacht atrocities? Did he take part in any atrocities? Do we know? What was it that changed him during the war to set him on the path that we all know? And if you know the answer to that, how do you think this informs his subsequent work?
He didn't become an artist during the war. After the war, he had a very major breakdown.
He decides that there's a letter to his parents in 1943 saying, I want to study sculpture at the Prussian Academy of Arts in Berlin.
In what year?
43.
But isn't that because he found this book of Lehmbruck's work that touched him? Isn't that the story?
Okay, so the breakdown, how do you explain this massive nervous breakdown in 56?
But everything that had happened in the war.
Well, what happened?
Henry Mercure.
If I'm not mistaken, he was invalided out after his disastrous accident in Crimea, and he went to Weimar. In Weimar, of course, he discovered Goethe, the Goethe House, and so on. He also discovered Rudolf Steiner, and at the same time, there was the very Hitlerianized Nietzsche House, which was a kind of shrine to a kind of falsification of Nietzsche's philosophy. And it seems to me that that was the crucial experience in his life. It was the discovery of Steiner and Goethe, who brought together his natural sciences, Goethe's studies of natural science.
And we've got somebody else waving very eagerly over here.
I was going to say that
I just want to add that he wrote this letter from Italy. Can I just say, all these things have an element of truth.
Yeah, sure.
And a truth shared by millions of people at that time, not just by himself. I mean, everybody at that time was at one level culpable, and everybody was equally a prisoner of that time. You know, it's very easy for us, very easy for critics and commentators to point fingers. But if you're born in 1923...
I'm not pointing fingers, I'm saying, do you see any guilt
may I just
in the work?
answer to your question? He wrote this letter from Italy when he was near to Foggia, and it was dated, I don't remember the exact date, at the beginning of 43. And there he wrote in this letter, and this letter is published in the book Eva Beuys, published Das Geheimnis zarter Knospe, etc. And he wrote also in this letter that he decided to become artist. So it was during the war, but in Italy. And he was very much impressed by the landscape of Italy, by the beauty and of the Mediterranean Sea, and so on and so on. So it was a crucial experience for him being in Italy, and he took the chance to get out of the, well, he wasn't in a battle there, he was just examining some weapons. It's hard to explain for me in English. Anyhow, so it was in Italy and nowhere else. And you can see it in the archives.
After Italy, he has his own experience on the Eastern Front in the Crimea.
Yes, of course. He just came from there.
But then after the Crimea, as I understand, he
had a terrible head injury.
he was hospitalized, but then he went back to the front. He was wounded a further 5 times. And then, well, that's not clear.
No, his final wartime experience were in the Rhine forest, as I understand, which was the most bitter, terrible, brutal fighting, between the Allies and the Germans. So, and
this is 44,
45.
45. I mean, all I would ask you is to go and look.
I want to hear more about that.
All I'm trying to get at is, do you, 3 voice experts, do you see any kind of guilt or mourning in the work itself?
Yes.
Yes, I see it in the work, but I also feel, I know that, we did not live through that time. And all of those people were prisoners of that time, whether they were Jewish, whether they were Germans. Obviously the Holocaust is, we don't want to talk about that, including my parents and my grandparents and so on and so forth. Know all about that too well. But equally, there were 100,000, a million young men who died on the field, young Germans aged 18 dying on the fields of Stalingrad. You know what I mean? It is we cannot begin to imagine the trauma of that time. And it was described to me in great detail by a close friend of mine, the famous German, the great German composer Hans Werner Henze, who told me how ghastly that period was to live through.
and how difficult it was, also in the immediate post-war
What I'm trying to
period.
get you to say is how does it manifest?
Well, let me tell you about.
I think, Norman, that you unnecessarily become angry.
We're not-
She was right.
nobody's
Because we are
angry.
talking about transformation. The man was a young person. He was German, he loved his country, and he committed maybe big mistake like like majority people, young people like the class was also in the Nazi party. But the fact that all the time you are talking about his art being transformation points very strong to the fact that he was thinking about this and he was trying to find, I don't know, answer in this field, maybe.
Exactly.
I
In some ways, you can say that Beuys's entire work is based upon this premise of how, not how could it have happened, but how could it never happen again. If you take just one work in Darmstadt, the Auschwitz, it's a vitrine, and it is an absolute horror. There's fat and sausages and railway lines and a
And
photograph, electric hobs. I mean, it's so graphic. And he submitted this, the drawing with it, for the great Auschwitz monument competition, which perhaps rightly was run by an Israeli. But that was his actual submission.
Chaired by Henry
So,
Moore. Chaired by Henry Moore.
I didn't know that.
And he didn't get anywhere, but the maquettes for it are included in that retreat. And I think what's so significant, I'm sorry, I'm hogging this. Well, I'm not going to say any more, but I think what is so significant is the very first thing that he does after recovering from his breakdown in 57, 58 is to enter that competition.
Exactly.
But I would
We're going to have to
urge
wind up
you
very soon.
to have a look at the photographs of the young Beuys and just look at that face and see those, in a way, dark pools of those eyes. And it is as if the suffering of Europe and his part, whether a victim or a perpetrator, in it was the thing that he had to heal. And those years of working in the fields, of being supported by the Van Grinten brothers, of making thousands upon thousands of these drawings. I think we haven't talked about the drawings, but the drawings.
What about the idea of showing your wound?
Yeah, showing
Another
it.
big concept.
But I think, Antony, you put it so well in the film, saying he was a traumatized man who healed himself by making things.
Yeah.
And I think on that note, I'm afraid we're going to have to end now because we've gone rather over time, but there's this wonderful exhibition that you can look at and see just how he did that. And my great, great thanks to the three of you for a wonderful exhibition. Thank you, Caroline, for joining us. Thank you, Antony.
The nice song about
Thank you.